Welcome back. We were talking about improving our odds in making our marriages work from the very beginning. And we had taken a look at two of our options. Let's take a look at our next graphic and see what we have here. The willingness to consider everything negotiable, with no demands that your partner accept your way of doing things without fair consideration of alternatives. So, at first when I had read this, I found that interesting, that everything is negotiable. And I was trying to reconcile that with what I know about the importance of having bottom lines, the importance of having values that are very important to you. So I'm just wondering about your thoughts as you read that.
Well, I guess that I have some concerns about that particular point. I think that most things ought to be negotiable. But there are certain areas that cross people's boundaries and values and would make it not possible for them to continue being who they are at all, you know. And I think there are less of them than a lot of people think, but still I think they do exist.
So have you ever had that experience clinically where a couple has gotten to a point where there's a point where they really could not find a way to negotiate?
Well, yeah, there are certain kinds. The idea of fidelity, where one person feels that fidelity is very important, the other person thinks that open marriage is a good idea.
That's a big one, yeah.
That's the number one example.
That would be the number one example. And, you know, certain kinds of things like that.
I would imagine having children. Whether or not to have children would be one of those.
Definitely, definitely. And you can't both have and not have.
Right.
Well, I think there are going to be quite a few disagreements and possibly unresolved disagreement where someone doesn't get exactly what they want or doesn't get close to what they want. It may be more of a compromise, but over a period of time, people change too. Individuals change in a relationship. So the key would be for an individual to know what they want, to identify what their needs are, what's important, to prioritize what's important, what isn't, not to make every conflict a major argument and to take offense. It's a balancing of the respect of your own ideals with the respect of somebody else's, because it's a 50-50 situation, and in that way couples counseling sometimes can be a bit more complicated than individual therapy. So it's the balancing of those, but you have balancing. If people mature in a relationship, I believe they have a better chance to see that there's things they haven't thought of, ways they haven't looked at that are beneficial for everybody, and then when it gets into raising children, then that really takes off. That's a huge, important area, but that's a whole other thing.
And I guess I would think that, I like that you mentioned the word ideals, because on the one hand, you know, there are certain ideals that we definitely hold, and then there are things that really are and should be negotiable. And those things generally come to us from the marriage of our parents that we bring to the new marriage. So that here we are, you know, trying to fit your parents' marriage into this brand new marriage, but of course he's trying to fit his parents' marriage into and you're putting these two marriages together, and it's, you know, it's not fitting. So those are the areas where, you know, you may think it's the right thing to do because you saw it like that. But in fact, those things are negotiable.
So it's sorting out, is this my value, or is this just something that's just the way it is because that's the way? Well, that reminds me, I was wondering about your take on Harville Hendricks' work, you know, where he says basically we marry our shadow. What we do is we find the worst parts of ourselves that we need to work on, that usually we bring from our family of origin, and in fact we pick our mates based on matching pathology, as opposed to the other parts of us that are working
complementary pathology, I would say.
Okay.
A lot of times I've seen that that's not the case. There's lots of different variations depending on the individuals. So it's hard to say exactly that you're attracted to someone of the opposite personality type or the opposite whatever you've repressed into the shadow. Sometimes it's true, and sometimes people are quite different. Other times they're quite similar, and in the last couple of years the studies I've seen have been mixed on both sides as far as how well the marriage will go. Okay. I think the number one criteria for how well the marriage will go is how much attention you put to it and how well you can deal with the intense feelings that come and still do what's best for yourself and for the relationship after the feelings go. Because the feelings are generally going to be as intense as anybody's felt in their life because of some of this stuff we're talking about
Okay.
with the parents and all these underlying psychological shadow
Yeah,
stuff
you
going
bet.
on. So it gets rough, but any feeling goes up and comes down, and I'm interested in what you do over a period of time when the feeling subsides. So that predicts a little bit better as far as what will happen in the relationship over the long term.
So really looking at the longevity, which means we need to hang in there long enough to get that kind of data. Let's take a look at our next couple of criteria. The willingness to consistently learn to understand your partner's point of view, and a commitment to try different ways of doing things long enough to see if the new ways work. And we mentioned before that idea of, being able to see the world through our partner's eyes and say, okay, well, based on the way they see the world, then I guess, their point of view does make sense. I don't have to agree with it, but, they have a point,
Right.
And the whole idea of being willing to hang in there, as you said, to give it enough time. I think there's I don't know about you, but I have seen there tends to be in development of a relationship. We have the first couple of years where we're all stuck together like this. And then usually somebody wants to begin to reclaim some of that independence prior to getting all enmeshed. And it depends. I mean, if you've maybe had some preparation, maybe in premarital counseling, you would expect that to happen at some point. If you don't, what I've seen is that people panic and then think, oh God, we're falling out of love. I mean, have you seen that in your practice?
I've seen that a lot, and actually, I have seen, I like Harville Hendricks' idea of the unconscious marriage, the way he talks about that, because in the beginning what looks like being in love is really about being unconscious and about being very external. But what happens is that once you hit the marriage thing, and even if you've been living together for a while, there are a lot of documented cases where people have lived together for a long time and then they get married, and God, it takes them 2 or 3 months and they're ready to, divorce. And that's because, the old ideas and the old feelings about that very old stuff comes up. And so I think at that point, what you have is an opportunity for healing. And that's what I think marriage is a lot about. So it's opportunity for healing, and it's opportunity rather than, how do we get through? This is good news. This is not bad news.
Yeah, that's true, I think, and then that's what makes it so hard, because a lot of times when people feel that their way of doing things or their way of looking at things is not going to be the way of doing things in a relationship, then they feel like they panic, as if they're not being respected, they're being rejected, which is generally one of the worst feelings. At least people report it as one of the worst feelings they can feel. And so they panic and say, how am I going to be more aggressive or more assertive, or neither or both? And so I think that what happens is at that point you have to come to the understanding of these 2 points that we just looked at, that if something changes in your life, something else is likely to replace it. Now, you have to be smart and try to evaluate what that is, because even if you give a good shot to a relationship and you give it a good effort, it may or may not work out. But I'm more interested in how well you put yourself into it and what kind of effort you put forth and how well you respected your needs and needs of others and all that stuff. So it's not so much even the outcome sometimes. It's a lot of times how you do it. And
It's your willingness, if I understand what you're saying, it's sort of your willingness to participate. I think a lot of us in this culture, we are pain phobic. And I was talking about this with somebody earlier today, that the idea that, if I only allow myself a medium level happiness, then when I experience pain, I only have to fall to this level of pain. Where if I really enter into an experience and I get very, very close to you, I'm going to have more to lose. And if it doesn't work, that pain is going to be much greater. And so I think a lot of us go into this with a protective sense of lowering our expectations maybe, or hanging on to some of that cynicism, particularly if it's a second marriage.
Or distance.
Or distance.
Yeah.
It's an excellent point. To sort of like, I really want to do this marriage, but I also want you to guarantee me an outcome.
yeah.
And we can't do that anymore. I mean, the idea of, we're going to live together till the day we die, people have more options now.
They seem to exercise more options.
And they certainly do
Yeah.
exercise it.
And people have a wide range of what works in a relationship. Generally, there can be a satisfying relationship, and it may not meet some of the criteria that we're talking about specifically. There's a wide range of what people agree on in their own relationship, everything from their relationship to whether to have kids or not, how to raise the kids, the whole thing. There's a wide range, so I'm very open-minded to the decisions that people make, and I've seen lots of different things work. But the key point is that you take responsibility for putting attention. You take responsibility for yourself on all those levels.
Yeah, that we didn't just happen to be married. I mean, I didn't just...
Yeah.
Of course, perhaps if I was still drinking and using, that could happen. But for the most of the time, if we're in our full faculties,
Yeah.
we do not just wake up one day. We do make a conscious decision to show up and do that. Go ahead.
Then I think the next conscious decision is how much responsibility you take,
Yeah.
and how much you blame, and
Yes.
then how much you're willing to take on yourself.
Well, that's an attitude toward life, though, isn't it? I mean, it's sort of some of us walk through the world, you know, being victims in all situations, work, marriage, everywhere else, you know, and I think in some ways we're kind of a victim culture, and lately, particularly, you know, we can
Yeah.
sue anybody for anything. And so what you're talking about is a pretty radical shift, and that, you know what, maybe I need to take some ownership here, and that, you know, people aren't necessarily doing things to me. Let's take a look at our last criteria before we close, because I think it's an important one. The maturity to forgive your partner for mistakes made in good faith. This, I feel, is a very, very important point in terms of believing your partner wants the best for you, believing in good intentions. Is that, how have you experienced that?
Well, I think that many people have enter into a marriage where they have so many bad experiences in their past from their childhood that they are they're very frightened and distrustful of the world, and then of their partners in particular. But and that leads to a lot of difficulty in the marriage, because there's a lot of fending off, a lot of distancing. Conversely, when there is a lot of willingness to believe the best, to take at face value what that person is saying and believe, there's a lot of healing that goes on in that as well, because...
We're going to need to stop, but thank
Okay.
you so much. I'm sorry to interrupt your point.
That's okay.
Thank you for joining us. Tune in next week when we look at the topic of birth mothers. I'm Mary Crocker Cook. Good night.